Welcome to the Truth About Real Estate Investing show. I am Canadian investor since 2005, investment specialist realtor since 2010. My team and I have done over $440 million in investment transactions. My name is Erwin Cito, and today we're going to talk about, my guest and I are going to talk about how a Canadian can get infinite mortgages in the United States. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about, I have an experience to share. I currently have 3 of my own houses for sale that I'm listing, and this will frame what I'm seeing in the market. So call it a market update. Again, I have 3 listings, all best in market student rentals, 2 in St. Catharines, 1 in Hamilton. I sold 1 in St. Catharines to a family whose child goes to Brock University, and they're going to move in. Well, the son's going to move in, the student's going to move in and rent out rooms to his friends. The 2 others were not attracting the interest I was expecting, which is nuts because there is very little out there in supply in terms of to buy or to rent. And I love, if you know me, you know I love having options when investing. I'll explain. My plan was to sell, and I'm not looking to give away my properties, so I put them back up for rent. My St. Catharines property, I have a group interested in paying me $4,550 per month inclusive for a house that I'm asking $650,000 for. We have the deposit already, and the new rent would be the rent would be 10% higher than what I got last year. My house in Hamilton is located near McMaster University. Our showings for rent went through the roof. In just 3 days of loan, we had 15 showings. We had actually more than that. We had all these uninvited people knock on the door as well to see the house. We signed a lease with a group of students for $5,950 per month plus utilities. That's an increase of around 40% over last year, because between the increase in rent and also I'm switching now the utilities from being inclusive to exclusive. I have first and last month's rent in hand, and leases are signed for a house I was asking $850,000 for. Now, these are, in my experience, are some of the best numbers you'll see in the market. And as I was ready for plan B, which was to enjoy my higher cash flows and hold for another year. But when I told showing agents what my rents were, all of a sudden their buyers became interested. I've taken up the risk of renting out the property. The rent numbers were obviously of interest to the buyers. And now I'm sold conditional on my other 2 listings. Fingers crossed they firm up. This is why I love income properties with options, as they rent for positive cash flow, and so I don't mind holding them. I do not mind holding them for another year, and based on my expectations and what I'm seeing in the market, and also with interest rates expected to start cutting in this June, I expect a better market. And as I tell the other agents, these buying agents, I tell them I'm happy to hold on to these properties, collect my cash flow, and I'll sell these properties for more money next year. Market-wise, this is still the least investor activity I've ever seen. It's now March, so seasonality-wise, whenever we have a warm winter, spring market starts sooner. It doesn't actually follow the technical definition of when spring is. Many years I've seen February be a hot market, and this is a very slow spring market based on what I'm seeing from investors. In my expert opinion, student rentals are one of the top 2, top 3 top investment strategies in Ontario because the rents are so high. There's limited vacancy, and also because we can get regular turnover of tenants. Students graduate. For example, my Hamilton property, the students are graduating from their undergraduate programs, so they need to leave. They're going to go home, whatever, move on in their lives. And I have the opportunity to adjust my market rents based on market rents. So again, investor demand is at an all-time low based on what I've seen in my career of being a coach and realtor specialist to investments since 2010. And again, from my experience, my properties are quality. And again, supply is extremely low, while my rents are at historic highs. Cherry and I will have a hefty tax bill to pay. I know many people are asking what we're going to do about taxes, but yeah, there's no avoidance of taxes or death. So we have significant taxes to pay on those capital gains, but to me, it's worth it. Raising cash and paying down debt will allow us to take advantage of other opportunities, as no one knows where this recession will take us. Also, one of my Hamilton property is unfortunately part of the rental licensing territory. So I don't even know where that's going to go. Anyways, next for Cherry and I is we're planning a trip post-tax season, a workcation, if you'll call it, to visit sunny and warm, landlord-friendly USA to check out some properties that we intend to buy this year. We're going to enjoy some Southern hospitality, fried chicken, my favorite barbecue, a visit to the King's Graceland, the king of, I don't even know what Elvis was the king of. Elvis is Graceland. Anyways, Lookout Mountain and the Dukes of Hazzard Museum. So Cherry and I have very different backgrounds on being raised, but I gotta see the General Lee. I'm gonna take her to the Duke of Hazzard's museum. I can't wait, as I am a total real estate nerd. Of course, who doesn't like warm weather? I love to make money. Obviously, I'm an investor. I love to eat good food, listen to great music, and experience iconic attractions. Public service announcement. I'm seeing some interesting stuff on social media. One podcast with a bankrupt host is just released a new episode. He's back. There's another guru who's running ads saying that they're basically financially free, even though I know they have 6 separate parties suing them, and they are former joint venture partners and coaching clients. So wow, just wow. They even display the testimonial in the ad from a friend of mine who's suing them. So buyer beware, do your own due diligence. Before you invest with anyone, do 10 reference checks. That's what I do. The more reference checks who made money and paid out, the better the reference. It's hard to fake being paid cash money unless it's a Ponzi scheme. But Ponzi schemes generally cannot last a down cycle, which is why it's a good idea to only invest in a strategy, a business partner, or investment that's been through more than one cycle. Sadly, businesses and so-called experts are going bankrupt right now. It's all part of the cycle. Folks who got too greedy at the wrong time, it's unfortunate. High leverage strategies or difficult flips or expensive cottages on Airbnb in a recession, it can be done by well-capitalized investors who are strategic, bought for great value, and big caveat, anyone who survives this period should do quite well. That's why survival should always be the first priority of any investor. This is done by having multiple cash flows, having multiple sources of cash flow, which is really important. Hence, Cherry and I are working towards building a 6-figure cash flow from single-family homes in landlord-friendly USA. It's easier there, and when there's no rent control, your rents can go up. I literally reviewed one of my properties, and I'm under rented by almost $1,400 on one property. $1,400 would make a big dent to my cash flow. Anyways, if you're interested in learning more about how Cherry and I are investing, we are hosting a U.S. investment workshop Saturday morning, April 13th, in our office in Oakville and online via Zoom webinar. We've already sold half the in-person tickets, so these always sell out, and people always last minute ask me if there's anything I can do. I can't. There's a whole thing called fire code, so we can only have so many people in the office. So to avoid disappointment, I've got the link in the show notes. We will be covering economic fundamentals for my research, the numbers behind each investment, corporate setup, tax implications, and of course, financing, financing is commercial style, which we'll cover in today's show. And if you don't know, financing is the ideal style of mortgages should anyone want a scalable portfolio, because you need a scalable portfolio in order to generate any sort of significant amount of cash flow or returns. So to give an example, I just had a client close on a property, an 1,100 square foot bungalow built in 1981. I mentioned 1981 because that is younger than the vast majority of my portfolio, in Memphis, Tennessee. Price was $95,000 American. Renovation budget, $25,000 American. Rent is $1,100 per month plus utilities American for a single family detached house. Not to mention there's no rent control, no landlord tenant board, no RTB for those folks in BC, no Residential Tenancy Act. My client is happy with how much he's going to cash flow, and I couldn't be happier for him. On to this week's show. Today we have mortgage broker Scott Dillingham from Windsor, Ontario, who, as far as I know, is the only investor specialist who can help Canadians with mortgages in both Canada and the United States. Scott was the #1 mortgage broker when he was working at one of Canada's biggest banks. You all know the name of it, but we're not naming names. Likely a quarter of you have bank accounts at this firm. I know I do. And Scott, I'm a past client of Scott's as well. He's got me several mortgages and my clients' mortgages at cheap rates. And I'm actually selling one of them. Scott has since opened his own mortgage brokerage called Lend City. He shares how, on today's show, he shares how American debt service coverage ratio mortgages work. That's what they're called. That's what they're called in the States. We have them here as well for anyone who does commercial real estate, meaning apartment buildings, or if you're buying like a strip mall. These are all debt service coverage ratio mortgages. And we're going to talk about why this is the most effective way to finance income properties. And this is really the only way to do it in this business sense scalable format. Scott is a real estate investor himself. His portfolio is actually significantly larger than mine. He's got way more doors than I do for sure. He shares some of his own challenges as a Windsor landlord and how and where he plans to buy his next investment property and why. For long-time investors, you'll remember the days around 10 years ago when we used to negotiate seller credits. If you're new to this, don't worry. Scott's going to explain it. Where we were able to bring down our down payments, thus improving our return on investment. We're going to roll back the calendar as seller credits are more of a norm in the US, especially with new construction, as it's a slow market in the States, in certain states, many states. So builders are offering more seller credits while we are in a slower market with historically high interest rates. Scott, of course, will be our mortgage expert guest speaker at our next US investment workshop that I mentioned earlier on Saturday, April 13th at our office. Again, links in the show notes. We'll also have everyone's favorite real estate accountant, my wife, Cherry Chan, CEO, and explaining the Canadian side of the taxes. And also we have all the executives from Share, my friends at Share, Andrew Kim, Dimitri Buchin, Carmen De Silva. And they're all speak to their respective areas of expertise. Again, linked in the show notes. You can also reach out to Scott and team at iwin@lendcity.ca. I have the email in the show notes. Again, that's iwin@lendcity.ca, iwin@lendcity.ca. It's a custom email address made specially for you, my 17 listeners. Please enjoy the show. Hi, Scott. What's keeping you busy these days?
All kinds of stuff, Erwin. I'm getting my hands wet in all kinds of different projects. One of the biggest ones that I'm most excited about is the US lending.
Yeah, let's dig into that.
I should say investing, US investing, but I do the lending. Here
Right.
we are.
Well, U.S. investing doesn't work without, like most people will say, that investing in real estate doesn't work without lending, like unless we can borrow for good rates, right?
Yep.
And that's honestly what's kept me out of the States for like back in '08, like any sort of real estate education, if you're around any of it, it was like widely known, right, that the U.S. had many landlord friendly areas, like but the lending was never there. So then pretty much everyone was forced to go to Alberta. Many people got hurt real bad with the oil crash. Many people made a ton of money in the States at the same time, right after, especially after the crash. Like like for Ryan Poole, like a mutual friend of ours, like him and his clients made a killing after the financial crisis. But again, most of us didn't have that kind of capital to take advantage, and the lending facilities weren't there. And I didn't know about lending facilities until you told me about it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. And I stumbled upon it sort of by accident myself.
Yeah.
Not really, though.
Mm-hmm.
Can I share that? Can I share the story?
Yeah, well, I'll go through it in the beginning, but
Okay.
you're big time.
For sure.
At the Bay Street Bank, you were the number one guy,
Yeah.
right? Investor focused. So
Yeah.
you had people's attention. So it didn't just stumble by accident.
No, absolutely. And that's where the problem started, actually, was at the bank.
Hmm.
Because people, and this is how long ago the demand was, right? When I was at the bank, people wanted to buy in the States.
Hmm.
And I kept asking the bank, when are we doing this? When are we doing this? Because they're expanding into the States. They've got branches there.
Hmm.
And they're like, oh, eventually. So then I left the bank. Nothing happened. And then they opened up their version of US lending, which is you can buy your secondary home
Hmm.
or like a cottage there for
Hmm.
yourself.
Yeah,
And
so for
that's it.
personal use, yeah.
Yes.
And you're
Yeah.
not allowed to rent it out at all, right? Wasn't that?
Yeah, like it's not like I think if you rent it out afterwards, what are they going to do kind of thing? You know
Right,
what I
right.
mean?
But
But
on
like,
paper, you weren't allowed to.
yeah, on the closing date, it's supposed to be for personal use.
Mhm.
So the
So
thing
not a
is,
scalable model to accumulate
no,
a portfolio of properties.
no, you can get one, right? You get
Yeah,
one
it's
and
hardly scalable.
woohoo.
Yeah, yeah, great. Yeah, that's great. It's better than nothing.
Yeah. But then, I left the bank and started my own company, Lend City, because I just needed more options for clients. That was really it. It was all about the options. And I hated making a relationship with a client at the bank, getting them their 5 properties, because that was
Mhm,
the limit, and
mhm,
then shaking their hand and saying, see you later. Right. So I wanted more options. So I started lending through Dominion Lending, and we have a commercial team and a residential team. So then, I'm getting inquiries from investors all the time saying, let me know when you have US lending because I want to invest there.
mhm.
And then it kept happening. And I'm like, okay, like this
Yeah.
is this is something. And then I thought back to my bank days and I'm like, I literally left the bank because I wanted more options for investors. And then here's the Canadian investing world, which is sort of crumbling. I hate to say it, like it doesn't, it needs fixing. I love Canada and, I still invest here, but it needs fixing. And investors are coming to me saying, hey, we want more options. And
Mhm,
so it all comes down to options.
mhm.
And here we are. I was born in the States. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to figure out what I need to do to be able to lend over there. And I figured it out. And here we are. Now we do residential and commercial over there too.
Can you elaborate more? How did you figure it out? Because
Well,
you have some special circumstances that not everybody else has.
yeah, so I actually got to give my neighbor credits.
Okay.
So this was a goal of mine, right? To get US lending. And in life, when
And pretty much no
something
one has cracked it as
happens,
far as I know.
what's that?
No one from our community has cracked this.
No, for sure, for sure. So this is super cool. Um, but like in life, whenever anything's meant to be, you know how it just sort of happens. I don't have an example to give you per se, but everybody who's listening to this, I'm sure something in their life, it just happened and it was like meant to be. You know what? I'll give you an example. Actually, I do have an example. One day I'm on the highway and I'm driving. Actually, I had to go to a real estate event and I'm in my lane and out of nowhere, and this has never happened to me before, my car went from the middle lane to the left lane. Like the wind took me one whole lane to the left out of nowhere. And it's never happened to me like that. Like you feel the wind, but to completely move you. But at that same simultaneous time, a truck's tire blew right to the right of me and he merged into my lane. So it was like one of those things, like it was meant to be that I live. You know what I mean? And in life, those things happen. And so this is exactly how it happened with the US lending. So I had a dream and a vision of how to do this, like I want to do it. But the question was how to do it. So I think in life, when you start opening up your eyes and looking for things, they come to you. And that's
Mhm.
exactly what happened. So my neighbor, who's also a mortgage broker, we do like a mastermind and we talk and have coffee and just figure out what's working, what's not working, and throw ideas off each other to grow. And he said, you know what? One of my past clients, he moved to the States and he works at this lender. And he was telling me, like, if any Canadians want to buy over there, that he could help them. And he's like, you know what? You should talk to them. Because I told him, like, the US is something I want to do.
Mhm.
Well, I talked to the guy and it morphed from a simple referring people to them to why don't you join us and we can do this. And
Mhm.
that's what happened. So from there, I joined them. And then, of course, I joined a bunch of other lenders as well. So we have multiple options for the clients. But that's how just a mastermind session with one of my neighbors.
Right. So combine your track record with networking, and
Yeah,
the opportunity appeared.
absolutely.
Right, yeah.
I think it does
It's
for
dumb
any
luck.
opportunity. Whatever you want in life, I believe whatever you want, if you start seeking it, you will find it.
Yeah, I'm seeking away from the tyranny of being a Ontario landlord and all the government's levels of government hating me. I still have to return the call from my bylaw officer, as apparently a couple of my properties fall under rental licensing. So
Oh,
I'm just gonna whine and say my rents aren't going up, and I can't afford this. There's not enough cash flow to afford like the $2,000+ to comply to your rental licensing standard. And I'm not renting to students anyway, so I'm not the people you're chasing. My basements were done with permits. Your city inspectors have already been to my property. I don't know why you're bothering me. Anyways, I digress.
no, that's
Uh,
a problem though everywhere. You bring up a valid point though. Even
yeah,
in Windsor, they're trying to make they're testing it in certain districts,
yeah.
but they want rental licensing, and the landlords are pushing back. And actually, they've started to sue the city, and they're saying no, like our property meets the code, and your rules don't allow for income to be generated from the property, and we're already tight. So with the
Hmm.
interest rates, right? So
Yeah.
it's a problem everywhere.
Yeah, and I'm for some like I'm a pragmatist. I'm all for like protecting people's lives. But for example, part of the rental licensing requirement is an ESA electrician inspection every 2 years. If I don't touch the electrical, even if I do touch the electrical, I need a permit for it anyways. So why do I need it inspected as well every 2 years?
Yeah, I think as a landlord, you know what I mean? It might not be a bad idea, just like you have to regularly check smoke detectors, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
make sure they're good. I think that might not be a bad thing for an investor to
Hmm.
check them, right? Because
Hmm.
tenants can tamper with it, right? So I think from
Yeah,
that standpoint, it's okay. But to have ESA come in and do all
yeah,
that,
yeah.
like overkill, that's
Right.
crazy.
Oh, and also licensing requires a annual fire inspection, which is practical,
Yeah,
right? Which solves your objection, right? Like solves the problem of smoke alarms, right? Of
yeah.
literally have someone from the fire department in the property. That makes a lot of sense. But an electrician, when you haven't touched the electrical, that makes no sense.
I, I agree. I
Right,
agree.
right, right.
Might as well get a plumbing inspection too while you're at it.
Don't give them ideas.
Yeah, it's true.
You haven't touched the
Well,
plumbing? Let's
thank
have
you.
it inspected.
Yeah.
Anyways,
That's-
so with the lenders that you signed up in the States, like these are like some of them are like Wall Street. Like they're not fly by night regional banks. Some of these are is big time.
yeah. No, they're big lenders.
Like among the
Lots.
biggest
Yeah,
household
lot.
names, are they not?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to throw out any names
Okay.
here per se, but
Hmm.
yeah, we have some very big lenders. I'm getting another part of my mortgage license. It's called the NMLS over
Hmm.
there. So then we can do even more things for
Hmm.
investors.
Hmm.
That license, it wasn't my go-to because that one's more for like the owner-occupied stuff, and
Hmm.
that's not our target client. But what it will do is it will allow us that when we have, an investor who invests over there and they build up a credit score,
Hmm.
it just gives us more options to potentially get them lower interest rates.
Right, right, right.
So we
I,
are
I,
looking
I,
at that. And yeah.
I would still imagine some of your clientele, like we had when we sent out a survey, I think about 10% of people were actually exploring moving to the States.
Yeah.
So I imagine that's within your clientele as well, that you have a percentage that will eventually want to move their residence to there as well, or at least buy
Yeah.
a home, buy a secondary home, whatever.
Absolutely. We've got a client right now. We're refinancing their home. They didn't know what the options were. And so
Hmm.
they're a snowbird. So they live in
Hmm.
Florida for half the year and then actually Windsor for the other
Hmm.
half of the year. And they bought it cash, right? So we're helping them to refinance. So
Hmm.
yes, I mean it is a thing. And we do have lenders that we can refer those files to right
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
But soon I will be able to do them. But our niche is absolutely the investor though.
Right, right,
So I want
right.
to focus there. But
I actually met a gentleman from Winnipeg when I was in Texas, and like he was having trouble getting financing for his joint venture partners. And I said, "You gotta meet Scott." So you're Canadian, so because he's diversifying to the states as well, from Winnipeg, and he's there regularly. And again, like his joint venture partners are all back in Winnipeg, but like so they couldn't figure out a way that made sense to get financing in the states. Like, oh, here Yeah, meet Scott. So I sent you guys. I sent Jillian and him an email to introduce each other. But
Well, thank you
so
for that.
I think folks need to appreciate that you are an investor yourself. Can you touch on what your Ontario portfolio is like?
Yeah, so at the peak of it, it went up to 8 properties. I did sell off a few. I used the proceeds to buy my office cash. Now, my office, we had it fully rented pre-COVID, and then COVID came, and then we stopped renting it out. But we're actually re-renting it out now. So even my office is an investment property. I
Hmm.
specifically bought it and we subdivided it, and there's all these little offices and things like that. Fully tenanted. We should be able to get 8,000 plus HST per month in total
Hmm.
rent for the building, and
Hmm.
that's including us still having space in there. So really attractive.
Hmm.
And I bought that 4 years ago for like 420,000. So the 2% rule applies. So
Yeah.
I love that because with commercial, you don't have the same rules as residential, right? Commercial, you have a lot of the US style rules, right? You don't pay
Yeah.
the rent, they're out in 2 weeks. It's much better.
Hmm.
So I really, really like that. So just imagine like a WeWork. That's kind of what it is, but we've got a lot more private spaces where WeWork is
Fabulous.
just very open.
So a lot of
So
courses out there are teaching like high leverage, and you're you're actually you're in the business of providing people leverage. Why the decision to buy all cash?
it was I guess to be honest, at the time, it was because I didn't understand commercial that well. I had worked at the bank and I had worked with commercial clients and referred them to commercial people within the bank. But having one lender and the way that that lender did it was just that, you had to refer the file over to somebody in commercial. I just wasn't aware of all the options,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So, um, and what I did, I was strategic, is I sold the properties that I knew an investor would buy,
Hmm.
um, that had, good numbers and stuff. That way they could sell quickly because I had to, the seller of the property that I bought, they were under, he didn't tell me at the time, but I found out after, but they were kind of under financial distress. So they really needed the money from the sale. So it had to be a quick close. So it just like made the most sense. I didn't want to sell a bunch of stocks and have capital gains and stuff like that. And mind you, rental properties have capital gains too, but I heavily renovated all of them too. Like I turned them all over. So I had a lot of capital cost allowance to minimize the capital gains. So
Hmm.
um, it just, yeah, it made the most sense. And that's what I did. The other thing too, though, so I'd say lack of knowledge is about 80% of it. But the other thing too is when you start a business, you want to keep your expenses as low as you can. So my
Hmm.
thought was if I own the building, right, there's no any expense on it
Hmm.
besides taxes and utilities,
Hmm.
that it'll work. And I
Yeah.
mean, it did. It served its purpose, right? During
Yeah.
COVID, when nobody even used the building, it was great to have no money on it, right?
Hmm.
So,
And
or
that
no
was what allowed a
debt
lot of
payment. Yeah.
and that's what allowed a lot of small businesses to survive. Anyone who owned their building, especially outright, they were able to survive. Versus anyone who had rent or big mortgage payments, they didn't do so well in the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah, so that helped, right? So that's a blessing in disguise. But now we're looking at taking out funds on it, right? Because we want to invest more in the States. And
Before we talk about the states, though, let's talk about
idle money, yes, idle money there.
so. Yes, we'll talk about the states. Why not more property in Ontario? You live in Windsor, Ontario, which, from my research, should be a great place to invest. In my, I don't live there, but from an outside point of view, like there's probably not many better places in Ontario to invest than Windsor with your affordability and the job story that's going on.
Yeah, it is a great area to invest. I am very pro Canada, and I know you are too. And I just want to
Hmm.
announce that 'cause I don't want people to think we're against Canada. Windsor, you're right. There's lots of good areas. We just got a listing that I shared with some investors. The purchase price is 500,000. It's got 3 units, and it can rent for 5,000 a month. Right. So really, when I grew up into the investing world, right, the 1% rule was what we were told is good. So if you can
Incredible, yeah,
rent a home for 1% of its value,
yeah.
then you've got a really strong property. So I mean, they're here. The properties are here. But that's not my challenge, right? My challenge is the system. And
Hmm.
that's where I think things are broken. Now, things are improving. I just read an article the other day. I wish I knew the source and I would cite it here, but I don't. But they're saying, the Ontario Tribunal, they actually hired a bunch more people again.
Hmm.
So they did a round of hiring in the past, and they're hiring a bunch more again to really shorten the wait times. So I think that's important because investors waiting 8 months to get a non-paying tenant out is a nightmare. That can
That's a
bank,
best case. That's like a best case, though.
yeah, and that can absolutely bankrupt someone. And in fact, I've seen it do that for certain investors, right?
Yeah.
Depending how large your portfolio or small it is. So you've got that problem, and I've got a great story that I can share with you about that problem. But then the other thing is rent control. So you look, and I feel for the tenants too. I want to state that, like, it sucks to live in a home when you're on a fixed income, and then if your rent just skyrockets, like that does suck, right? But at the same point, um, we don't control where the interest rates are going and what they're doing. And when they went up, people renewed, even myself on one of my properties, I had to renew. And my property went from cash flowing a couple $100 a month to actually losing 1,800, which is crazy because my mortgage is just the renewal rates were 4 times higher than what I had it at. So, for an investor, most people can't take that type of a loss.
Hmm.
So it's huge. So the lack of rent control, I think, is a problem. I believe if there was a no rent control, let's say, and the rates skyrocket like that, and you're going to lose your home, right? Then you can raise the rent. And you know what? It does suck if that tenant can't pay, but they could find somewhere else as well that might be affordable to them if they can't pay the rent. And then you put someone in who can afford the rent.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's a lateral thing, but in Canada, we don't have that ability. So the landlord eats it all. Um,
Yes, I've been joking with people that we are charitable in that we are subsidizing all the tenants' housing inflation.
yeah,
Not all of it, but a good portion of it, since we can only raise rents 2.5% when inflation's more like 7.
yeah, it's true. And I saw this TikTok video and it was so good.
Yeah.
Uh, and it said something like, if I were to go into the bank and rob them for $10,000, I would go to jail.
Yeah.
But as a
Yeah.
tenant, I'm allowed to do that without
Yeah.
really any penalty in
Yeah.
Canada. I'm
It is your
allowed to
right.
do that, not pay the rent
Yeah.
and live in the home for all
Yeah.
this time.
It is your right.
I'm not a criminal.
Yeah. Here's some
It's
free legal aid too. Here's a free lawyer.
Yeah. So like that should be a crime. And in the States, as you know, certain states, it is a crime if you don't pay your rent.
Hmm.
And you
Hmm.
can go to jail for it in certain states.
Hmm. Hmm. That's the key part is that people don't like America's different. Just like states are different, counties are different, no different than parts of Canada are different.
Yeah,
Alberta does not have the same problems that Ontario does.
for sure. But they're trying to force rent control in Alberta.
I won't be surprised if we see something for like Calgary. It's just because they're just, you know, like yeah. That's another topic for another
Yeah.
day. But sorry, before you were recording though, you were mentioning that your own story because you have a property you
Yeah.
have listed right now.
Yeah. So the one that I'm actually losing 1,800 a month, it doesn't make sense to keep it, right?
Hmm.
Why keep a weak property? So you want to sell that, take your capital and reinvest into something that makes you money. It's a smart business decision.
Hmm.
I can't control the rates right now, and they are coming down. So like, I see some light at the end of the tunnel. But it is what it is. So this specific property, I put it up for sale because I want to redeploy the capital
Hmm.
somewhere else.
Hmm.
And then just during this process, the tenants were really good to work with. In the beginning, they were allowing us to show the property and things like that. And this week alone, they text the realtor and they're like, "Don't text me again. We're not allowing you access to show this property. I'll report you if you text me again." Like that's literally what they said to the realtor. Um, so you got that problem. Then they also I don't know what they did specifically, because they're giving multiple stories. Like the one kid said, "Oh, I spilled a water bottle in the basement," and then another child told a contractor that went through there that he fixed the water leak, whatever that means. But anyways, I got a quote for like 10 grand of damage in the basement. So I feel like I don't know, and I don't want to point fingers, but it feels like that happened right before a showing, and it just seems like they're trying to make it so the property doesn't sell, right? They're avoiding the showings.
Right.
They It wasn't flooded, the basement, but there was enough damage that to rip up the flooring, trim, all that stuff, 10 grand. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like
And like a
stupid,
week or
stupid
two of
stuff.
time to get it done.
Yeah. And I don't even know if I want to get it done while they're there because is it gonna happen again? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it already happened once. And then so for me to process the eviction, right? If that's what we're doing here, 8 months, maybe longer, right? Of this.
Hmm.
So it's not a good scenario. Do you know what I
Hmm.
mean? It is what it is. So it doesn't matter if you're a new investor or an experienced investor, these problems can apply to
Hmm.
anybody that
Hmm.
invests here.
Anywhere in Ontario,
Yeah.
potentially BC as well. Because that before we were recording, I was saying I would pay them the 10,000 to leave.
Yeah.
Because this is the situation that we're facing in Ontario is that we don't have control of our own properties. It is almost a standard operating procedure to buy out your tenant to compensate them for their moving expenses and the grief of moving in the figure of 5 to 25,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but this is not, that doesn't happen in the states. Not in the right
Yeah.
ones. Not in the right ones.
No, it shouldn't be that way. I think I agree in fairness on both sides. I think there has to be because I gotta say too, seeing lots of clients and stuff, there's a lot of landlords that don't care. They're
Yeah.
actually very bad landlords.
Oh yeah.
So I understand the tenants and how they feel in certain cases.
Hmm.
But when you're a good landlord and you're doing all the things properly,
Hmm.
for these things to be allowed to happen to you, I
Hmm.
completely disagree with.
Yeah. Yeah. The failures of the landlord tenant board are the worst for the tenants because they
Yeah,
often have nowhere else to go and they have real problems.
yeah,
Right. Say your problem was say your property had truly had a leaking basement and the landlord wasn't willing to deal with it. That means mold, that means sewage, that means terrible health implications, right?
yeah,
And that same tenant will need 8 months to get a hearing at the landlord
yeah,
tenant board, right? To get any sort of forced action on it. Like it's ridiculous.
yeah. And the other thing too is like, because when I heard that from the showing, from the realtor that did the
Hmm.
showing, I called my property manager and I'm like, hey, there's water in the basement. Send somebody out to fix it. They called the tenant and the tenant's like, oh no, there's no issue here. Everything's fine. There's no water. Do you know what I
10 grand of
mean?
water.
Not only are they like hiding it, but they're not announcing challenges, which could cause more challenges, right? Like
Yes.
mold, like you just said, mold could happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So craziness.
Craziness. And then what are your plans to do with the proceeds if it ever sells? This is
Yeah.
great. This
Yeah.
is great promotion for your property.
Yeah. So I'm not sharing the address with anybody.
Sure, what's the address? What's the name of the realtor?
um, but
Who wants
yeah,
a
so
motivated seller?
yeah. The proceeds, yeah. I mean, I want to invest in the States. That's the goal. And I'm not gonna like completely exit Canada. I want to invest here. I
Hmm.
love the commercial thing that we're doing with my office. That
Hmm.
is duplicatable and
Hmm.
repeatable, right? And
Hmm.
and scalable. Um, so I want to continue that, right? So there's a lot of good things in Canada.
Hmm.
It's just the States when it comes to residential properties in the states that I like, you can get so much more income, so much more flexibility.
Hmm.
um, I don't even know if this is a word, but there's a pride of rentership in the states and areas that I'm looking at. It's not like, I don't know. It's hard to explain. You got to see it to believe it.
What markets are you targeting for your own investments?
Just like you, I love Texas. I love
How can
Texas.
you tell I like Texas?
What's that?
How can you tell I like Texas?
I don't know. I don't know. Let's give it away.
for
I just have this feeling.
for anyone who's just listening, I'm wearing my Texas hat. So
Yeah. Yeah, Texas is cool. Did you know, this is more of a did you know, but did you know that Texas has the legal right to be its own country if it wants to?
Oh my God, that's probably on the horizon.
It totally can be its own country.
All right.
It can separate from the states, no problem, if they
Mhm.
wanted.
Yeah.
Um,
Let me just
but
add though, like I doubt it will happen, but it's a great leverage tool to get what they
yeah,
want in the negotiations with the
absolutely.
federal government, right? Like
Yep.
we see the same posturing, we've seen the same posturing in the past from like Quebec and now from Alberta, and that got them benefits, right? As a province benefited from it. Alberta will benefit from their posturing as well, and I'm sure Texas
Yep.
will gain from it as well. Yeah, I can't see them actually separating.
No, for sure. I don't see it either. But I also like Ohio and I like certain parts of Michigan
Mhm,
because Michigan is really close for me. It's literally I just
mhm,
cross a bridge because I'm in Windsor, right? So I just cross a bridge and there's Michigan. And
mhm,
driving through and going shopping with the family and because there's all these really nice malls in Michigan. So
mhm,
we'll make a fun day of it. We'll go see the mall, but we're also driving through the neighborhoods and stuff. There's some really nice areas and Michigan and Ohio have really cheap
mhm,
real estate prices. So it's just different targets, right? For appreciation, I think I like the southern states better. If I'm looking for cheap real estate with maybe like a stronger cash flow ratio,
mhm,
maybe not dollars in the bank, but ratio, obviously Ohio and Michigan will give you
mhm,
a higher ratio of cash flow.
mhm,
But yeah, just buy a little bit here, a little bit there.
mhm,
Want to get some Airbnbs in Florida as well.
mhm.
Uh, so then, and when it's not rented, it's available for myself if I want to
Yeah,
use
let me
it.
know. Let
So
me know what's available.
yeah, for
Because
sure.
the nice thing about Florida is like nobody can beat that weather. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like maybe California can, but California's pricey. And also, you and I are East Coast folks, which is like I should correct myself because there is no coast in Ontario. We don't actually touch the ocean, but you know what I mean. We're Eastern Standard Time. Florida is just straight to south for us. And I just want for listeners' benefit, I too agree that I want to go south. Because for example, you mentioned Ohio. Columbus, Ohio is getting an Intel plant.
Yep.
So that'll be thousands of jobs. It's a multi billion. It's several $1 billion investment. But also Phoenix, Arizona is getting the TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, is building
Yeah,
just outside Phoenix.
there's someone else. I'm gonna look it up right now, but there's a
Tell me who's
Samsung.
not.
There's a
Samsung's in
Samsung
Austin.
plant.
Samsung's in Austin.
Awesome. That's it. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So there you go.
I
Another
was
reason.
outside. I was probably making security nervous by standing on the property taking pictures.
That's awesome.
Anyways, but so when investors ask me like, "Oh, how do I choose?" Like I say to them like, "Okay, so say for example you work in manufacturing microchips. You are an employee of you're qualified to work for Intel or TSMC, right? Would you choose to live in Columbus, Ohio, or Phoenix, Arizona?" And not one person has told me they'd rather live in Columbus, Ohio than Phoenix, Arizona. So I will prefer to invest south, right? Because that's generally demographically like people have roots and family, whatnot. But you know, for someone that doesn't have roots anywhere and is moving specifically for work, I'm gonna guess that TSMC will have more luck recruiting for Phoenix, Arizona than Columbus, Ohio.
Mhm.
Hence why like Columbus, Ohio on paper makes a ton of sense, but again, like demographically, and we see it demographically as well. It's generally people have moved south for the better weather, like largely for the better weather.
Yep, and it's the same as here, right? We all live in different
Yeah,
locations for certain reasons,
yeah.
right? So, like you said, you have to come up with your why. Like, why do you want to invest there? What is it you like about the area?
Hmm, hmm.
Um,
I like making money. That's why I like investing there.
yeah, yeah, but I mean, in both, you got to admit, Phoenix, Arizona, and Ohio, you're gonna make money in both. But
Yeah,
it's just like, you know,
yeah. And just for me, because I want like every check mark in my favor, and also because
yep,
my plan is to buy in like Carolinas, Alabama, Texas,
yeah.
Tennessee, Georgia. I only have so many dollars to stretch.
Yeah, and the other thing too, just for the listeners here, the reason I like Michigan and Ohio is they're so close to me. Like,
Hmm,
because I'm in Windsor, Ohio is maybe 2 hours away,
hmm,
and Michigan, like I said, I just drive across the bridge and it's right there.
hmm.
So that there's a level of convenience there for
Yes,
me.
of course.
But people in GTA like yourself, you don't have that super close proximity. I mean, you got Buffalo, New York.
Hmm.
I've had a lot of investors buy in Buffalo.
Hmm.
We just did it was a duplex. They bought it for 220 and it rents for about 3,000 a month.
Yeah.
But still, I agree with you, right? The southern states, I think it's where it's at. And like you said, it checks off more ticket boxes.
Yeah, I think I heard some things about Buffalo's becoming more tenant friendly, so I didn't like those rumblings.
That could be. That could
Yeah.
be. I've not researched it as an area that I want to invest in, so I
Hmm.
didn't
Hmm.
look that
Hmm.
far into it.
So Scott, tell me about how a U.S. mortgage works for a Canadian, because I find almost nobody knows how these things work, including myself, until you brought it up to me back in like August 2023.
Yeah, so pretty much you want to buy in a company name or a limited partnership. We do have, it's very few lenders, but we can close in the personal name. But
Right.
if you want best rates, best terms, right, you want to close in an entity in a corp. Now, I'm
Right.
not licensed for tax advice. I know Cherry is. Do you have any advice from her from a tax perspective on what's better between personal versus limited partnership? Are you allowed to say that?
I'll just give the regular disclaimer. I'm not an accountant. Go talk to your accountant. But personal is seems to be more for people who are going to be very small scale,
Okay.
right? Because the accounting fees are significant if you have a corporation of any sort, right? Because for example, if for investors in Canada, if you already have a corporation, you know what your fees are like, and you should
Yep.
expect to have basically the same in the states, right? That's
Yep.
the cost of doing business for a multinational business investment company, right? And so then my advice to clients is this US investing doesn't really make sense unless you buy at least three properties so that you can generate enough cash flow to cover all these extra expenses and overhead, right? And if you're going to go that, if you're going to own three or more and your plans to grow, because for example, my plan is to grow to 20, 30 properties. Like it makes sense that I go LP format at least,
Yep.
right?
Makes sense.
And that's the importance of having a good team because your accountant needs to be able to talk to your mortgage person so that you're all on
Yep.
the same page. Because what's optimized for tax is not necessarily optimized for borrowing.
Yep.
Yeah, because you do not want to get this wrong.
Sure. But no, you bring up good points. And that's exactly it. I think that's why the lenders prefer it too.
Mhm.
So then the down payments, they can range. Okay. And generally speaking, the more money down you do, up to 50%, that'll get you the best rates. So the very smallest down payment I saw, it's only available for rock solid deals, is 25 down.
Mhm.
But 90% of the lenders are going to want 30% down or more.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, where they get the or more from is because the other thing that they look for is the cash flow of the property. So if the property has a weak cash flow, some of the lenders are going to want you to increase your down payment to the
Mhm.
point where you have positive cash flow. So that's why it can go higher. But we have other lenders that don't care what the DCR number is. But what they'll do is they'll charge you a higher rate
Mhm.
because it's riskier for them to lend on properties that don't make as much money.
Mhm.
So then they just increase the rate, but keep the down payment small.
Right, right,
Uh,
right.
so that's kind of how that starts. But for a Canadian buying, and it's actually any foreign buyer, doesn't have to be Canadian. So if you're listening to this from Mexico, this still applies.
Yeah.
Um, they don't look at your, like, you don't need a credit score in the States. They don't even look at your income at all. What we have to supply them is pretty much your Canadian credit report. And they're not even really looking at the score. They want you to be a homeowner in Canada or own an investment property because they don't want to lend to someone who has no experience. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of
Mhm.
their thing. And then,
Or you might think you're trying to buy something to move into. Versus you
yeah,
already have your home here, then you're less likely. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So those are things that they
Interesting. But these requirements are all very minor.
It's super minor. Yeah, it's so easy. And then of your home that you have, if you have a mortgage on it, they want to make sure that you don't have any late payments on your mortgage. So that's really what they're looking for from your Canadian credit. They're not looking at your score. They're not looking at the other items as well. So from that, they'll move forward. Now, your down payment, they do check a 60-day minimum. Some lenders want a little more, but the smallest one that we have is 60 days. Um, right? Anti-money laundering rules, just like Canada. Canada's 90 days. They want 60 days of proof of where your funds are at, and they want the funds to be in the States. So you've
Hmm.
got to really transfer the funds
Hmm.
at least 30 days before the closing. Okay, just so it sits there. So that's a requirement. Some lenders you can sign fully remote, so you don't have to leave Canada at all. Some want you to at least sign with a notary or someone in the States, sign with someone in the States.
Hmm.
Um, so it all depends. And that's part of our discovery call that we have with clients is we find out if they have the capacity to go to the States. Because if you can, you will get better pricing because the lenders, right? You got to think of it from their
Yeah,
viewpoint.
yeah,
Their viewpoint is if they can reduce the risk,
yeah, yeah.
then you get a better rate.
Yeah,
So
I'm
if you
cheap.
can go
I'm
to the
coming.
States, yeah. So if you can go to the States, it's less risky to them because you're a validated person
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and you get the better rates.
Yeah, I'm
So
down for that. I'm down. I'm cheap. I'm coming. Niagara Falls, New York.
yeah,
Here I come.
the property too. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
it's worth it.
The view from the
Um,
U.S. side's better too. So.
yeah, yeah. So that's really it. Like I know I'm being so high level. The pre-approval process, it
But
is
really, is there not much beyond the high level though?
no, no. I mean, there's rules and things that they look for, but it's all pretty standard. And if client is following, like you said at the beginning, you leverage your team properly. And if they're following our advice and the realtor's advice, like we're gonna help you to make it work, right? So
Yeah,
there's not going to be a big thing. There is an application you got to
yeah.
fill out. There's little things like that, but we help you with all of that. Um, but yeah, super, super simple. I had a great point. I forget where I was going with it, but
I have a
yeah,
great point.
yeah,
Me getting a B lender mortgage is worse than this process.
yeah, yeah.
And they've been giving me crap LTVs too.
Yeah, it's
Like they won't give me
probably
equity takeouts, even though I have lots of cash and lots of equity. Like this is,
it's
and
probably
sorry
risky as a private
to put
lender.
words in your mouth. But actually, apologies because you actually said it. You said at the last U.S. investing workshop we had. I believe your words were, "It is 10 times easier to borrow money and build a portfolio in the States than it is in Canada." 10 times
Yeah,
easier. Yeah.
yeah. They just want to see that you have really the down payment. They do want you, depending on the lender, and this is another condition, between 6 months to 12 months of payments.
Hmm.
That can even come from a line of credit. So you don't even have to have the money in your bank account, but they just want to make sure that you can pay it in case there's a vacancy or whatever. Now, those funds, they do not have to be earmarked. So on a future purchase, you can use those same funds to
Right.
count as your payments.
Right. Right.
You don't have to keep growing that.
Right. Right.
Um, but yeah, then from there, it's super easy. It's simple. Now, I want to share something with everybody too that we discussed, and that's the seller credits. Do you think
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah. Yeah, because we used to have those
yes?
in the good old days.
So,
Yeah, please explain.
so
Because
in
we haven't
this,
talked about it on the show. We haven't talked about it on the show for I don't know if ever. Because when was the last time we could do seller credits in Ontario?
I honestly, Erwin, probably 10 years ago because when I first did, it was acceptable. We actually did it in Canada as someone's
Yeah,
down payment.
yeah,
So the
yeah.
purchase price was 200, the seller credit was 10 grand to be applied as the down payment, and the lenders were okay with it when I first started.
Right, right, right,
And then it went away. It was
right.
gone.
So for the listeners' benefit to catch them up, around 10 years ago, we were able to get seller credits for our closing costs, for example. That was the most common one we'd ask for. And then we'd ask for even seller credits for any sort of deficiencies we'd find in the home inspection. Like say the electrical was bad, so we need like $5,000. We'd ask for a credit in Schedule A of the agreement of purchase and sale. So it was all above board. The lenders see it all, right? That all stopped like around 10 years ago as well.
Yep. Yep. But they have it in the States. So the trick, right? Because everybody wants the best rate. And by default, if you look at the States rates versus Canada's rates, They are higher in the States than in Canada by default. Doesn't matter what lender you're going to. It's just how their market is. We have lower rates here. So what you do as a Canadian who's buying over there is you ask for a seller credit. And I've spoken to a few realtors in the States, and they said anywhere between 2 to 3% of the purchase price is extremely common over there, like extremely common. Now, I've done the math for many investors, um, and you make out much better getting the credit, and I'll explain why in a second,
Mhm.
if you lower the purchase price on the home. Now, ideally, you want to do both, right? You want to try to negotiate a lower purchase price
Mhm.
and also get a credit. But if the seller's being really tough,
Mhm.
then get the credit.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, what we do is we can use some of that credit. There's limits to how much we can use, but we can use some of that credit to buy down your interest rates. So right now, the lenders, depending on everything, and I'm gonna like just a blanket statement, rates, the average is between 8 to 9.5. And they're so different because in the States, you can make your mortgage fully open from day one, but that costs you 1% in the rate to do that. But then as an investor, right, you can refinance whatever you want to do, right? It gives you flexibilities. Also, certain states like New York, right? There's
That's not
higher
bad.
interest rates.
Yeah, if you have
Um,
fully open, you can do a burr then.
exactly,
You can
exactly,
refinance cheaply and yeah, you can refinance after your post renovation.
exactly. So that's why I'm giving you such a range, right?
Hmm.
So 8% is just the standard. 9.5 is you want it fully open, like you're good to go. But then you can apply the seller credit. And the seller credit can get your rate down to as low as 6.5. That's the lowest that the lender will go, or that I've seen a lender be willing to go to. Um, as of today. Now it changes, right? So in December, the lowest, they call it the floor rate. The floor rate in December was 7%,
Hmm.
but now it's come down to 6.5. So I suspect as the rates drop in the States, that the floor rates will also come down, meaning you can secure that lower rate. But just by adding roughly, let me see if I've got the deal real quick. I'm going to pull it up here. I know I have it saved, but we worked on one and I actually presented it to your group. And I just want to give everybody here the example. So the client was buying a condo in Florida, and it was around 300,000. Let me see here,
Sorry,
and
you said 300,000?
yeah, and he asked for a 2% seller credit, so he got 6,000 bucks. And I'm just pulling this up here.
Let me just add to the seller credit part. And when I was in a developer's office, they were building new homes in Texas. They were offering seller credit as the promo, and they weren't offering that off the price, but their suggestion was to buy window coverings because it's a
Yeah,
brand new house, so there's no window coverings. Period. Right. So put in some like Venetian blinds or something, whatever. Right. And also they were buying down the rate. So yeah, just not something we're too used to back here.
yeah, and you can use it for other stuff too. So, like, say you negotiate a 3% um, seller credit, the lender will let you buy down, and I'll show you here in a second. But the client only negotiated at 2%, so he put all the money towards it. So, anyways, if we take his $6,600 and we pay it down to the rate, so he would have received 8.375. Okay, so I know I said rates started at around 8, but this was a condo and the DCR wasn't that great because it
Mm,
also had an HOA fee, which is the same as like a condo fee over here, like
mm,
it's homeowners association fee. So condos are priced a little bit higher because their cash flow is a little bit weaker. So he couldn't get the floored buy down rate, but he used that money and he bought down his rate to 7.375.
mm.
So he was very happy with that. When you shop the market at what that rate looks like, it
Yeah,
was
yeah,
very aggressive for this time, and it all came from the seller. So he didn't have to, no skin off his back.
right.
And he saved by getting that seller credit $150 a month in cash flow,
Fantastic.
which is crazy. Yeah. And then his more of his payments were going to principal because he wanted principal and interest. although you can do interest only, but he just wanted to pay this thing down. So now more of his payments go to pay it down and everything, all because the seller gave him the credit. So it's
Mhm.
such an awesome tool.
I have so many questions.
It's okay.
Can you? I still think the point needs reinforcing. Like, how much easier is it to get a mortgage in the States than in Canada?
10 times. It's so much easier.
Like, who gets denied? Because I get denied on financing here in Ontario.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that I've seen with any approvals is when you have all kinds of partners involved.
Right.
Uh, because the lenders, if it's too convoluted and this
Hmm.
partnership owns that one and that one owns there,
Yeah.
it's hard for them to track. So I honestly find that the super complicated corporate structures,
Hmm.
that's when the lenders are just going to say, okay,
Right.
we're going to do it, but we're jacking up your rate because we don't understand what you're doing over here. It's
Right.
crazy. And so they do charge you more if you have that complicated structure. I've not had an application declined because of that, but it gets confusing for them. They're not in the business of knowing
Hmm.
all these corporate
Hmm.
structures.
Hmm.
So you'll pay for it. So that's kind of been a negative that I've seen. Um, and then obviously, right, you can't have late payments on your house mortgage, but I haven't had any clients that had that, but that's a hard, like you're declined if they see that.
Right.
Um,
So it's all
and
very
then I think,
reasonable.
yeah, and they don't want the last major thing for somebody is they don't want very rural properties.
Okay.
So, because you're a foreign buyer, they're looking more for cities. So buying in even small towns are okay,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they don't want like you're the only house, 5 miles that way and 5 miles that way. They're not into those.
Right. Because they don't want to take it over. They don't want a bad asset.
Exactly.
Sounds very reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't even know where I want to go next. So, oh, you mentioned DSCR, and I had a question around that. Okay, so sorry, can you explain what goes into a debt service ratio mortgage? What's the calculation, and what are the inputs?
And actually, yeah, this is great. And I'm going to tie it into the statement that I was going to make about pre-approvals as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
This is how you get
Oh, we can get
pre-approved.
pre-approved too. Fantastic.
Yes. Yes. So what we do is we get the numbers of the property. So we find out the estimated purchase price of the property. So that goes in the DCR. Then we factor in the property taxes. We find out if there's a homeowners association fee.
Hmm.
We find out the hazard insurance is what they call it over there, which is home insurance.
Hmm.
So we find out what that is. And then lastly, we find out what the mortgage payment is, right? Like what rate you'll qualify for based on all the
Hmm.
numbers. That's it. That's the only thing that goes into the debt service coverage ratio. And based on that, we get a net DCR result. So if that's a good result, then we can write up a pre-approval letter for you that you can give to put in your offer. Now, because of capacity, we don't just write pre-approval letters because I had one investor and he gave me like 20 properties and he's like, can you give me pre-approval letters on all these? And I was like, no, like
Was he
what one,
buying all
I'll
20?
run all the numbers. Exactly. He wasn't.
Oh, okay.
So we can run all the properties for you, but we only give the pre-approval letters when you're ready to put an offer on the home, right? Because it would have taken a few hours to do this for this gentleman,
Hmm.
and he ended up not even offering on any of them,
Oh,
right? So we
gee.
have to be careful of our time, but we'll write you that pre-approval letter, which I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, the sellers want to see this. They want to see this letter. Now, obviously, if we're doing a deal with Share, so Share has a
Hmm.
great, and I know you guys who follow Irwin know Share, but just in case, right? Share finds the properties, underwrites them, turns them over, and rents them out, and you get a turnkey property. So something like that, um, you're not going to necessarily need a pre-approval letter for, right? Because they're gonna, or do they want one? I don't think they want a pre-approval letter.
I don't think they know. I don't think they need to because they know they have proof of funds and they know what the property is.
Yeah. But if it's, you found the property on the market, those are the things that you're going to need, and we
Hmm.
can do that for you.
Right, right.
And we share the tool too. We're not shy. We share the tool for anybody. You can download it, and it's got the 30-year term right next to the 40-year term. So then you can kind of compare because maybe it's a little tight with the 30-year, but the 40-year works.
You mentioned 30-year terms. Are there going to be so my understanding is that in the States is the market is generally 30-year term mortgages.
Yeah,
As in your rate is fixed for 30 years.
right.
So again,
Exactly.
as a Canadian, like that boggled me and it boggles everyone because that's not what we're used to here in our market.
Yeah.
Are we gonna see shorter amortizations terms anytime soon? Because I gotta imagine the market wants it, especially since all
There
indications are that
is.
we've peaked in rates.
There is. We're refinancing another property right now in Florida, and the gentleman, he's got a 15-year term on his. So you can get shorter, but the thing is for an investment property, is it going to cash flow if you choose 15 years?
Amortization or term?
They make it the same thing over
Oh
there.
boy. Okay. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. But you can go with 30 and you can increase your payments if you want, which will technically shorten the amortization.
Hmm.
But that's how they do it. In the
Right.
States, they don't have separate terms like in Canada, where the amortization and the term are two different things.
Yeah.
It's the same thing over there.
Right. Right. Because I want a cheaper rate. So speaking of cheaper rate, is there a way to build credit in the States, and is there a benefit to it, and how do you do it?
There is, yeah. So the lending is one part of it, right? So having the mortgage. So it just depends on your entity, right? Whether you set up as a corporate personal. These mortgages, from what I'm told, they don't build personal credit, but they will build credit in your corp.
Yeah, good
Okay.
enough. I just want cheaper rates at
So
some point.
yes. So then you've got that credit. Now the lenders, they want you to have one other item. So I opened up my bank account through Comerica when I set up over there, Comerica
Oh, we're
Bank.
name dropping.
There's a whole bunch. I hear Chase is really good for Canadian too. But the reason I chose Comerica is, well, one, it's local to us. But two, they don't require you to have a Canadian address, or sorry, a US address to set up the account. A lot of the banks want that. Um, so, anyways, when I was there, the guy told me, he's like, look, if you bank with us and we see your transactions and we see what you're doing, he's like, reach out 3 months, 6 months. And he's like, we'll give you a credit card. And he said, you know what? If we don't by default, then we could give you a secured credit card. And then that can help to start building your credit history. And then from there, once you're getting that history, then your pricing can go down because and we've talked about this in the past, Erwin, but it's great for the podcast here. Generally speaking, the lenders price as if your credit score is 680
Mhm.
as a foreign buyer. But it's cheaper, right? If your score is higher than that. So that's why you want to build that credit history. But in the same point, Erwin, the floor rate is the floor rate. They're not going to go any lower, regardless of your credit score.
Mhm.
So if you're getting that seller credit and you're applying it and you're getting that best rate, your credit doesn't necessarily come into play. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm. Yeah, but then I'd run a cheap rate based on my credit, and I'll use the seller credit for something else, like
Yeah,
change the floors, remove the carpet, paint the house, something like that.
yeah, you can. And one more thing about the rates, because it is lowering over time, just like Canada. And what these lenders do is by default, the longest I've seen is your mortgage is fully open after 5 years. So they open it up. The shortest I've seen is you're open after 3 years.
Mhm.
And that's without paying a rate premium.
Mhm.
That's just built into automatically their mortgages.
That's
So in this,
amazing.
that's how it is with every mortgage. After a certain period, it becomes open, and 5 years is usually the maximum.
Right.
But if you're an investor and you feel the rate is going to be lower in 1 year, you can do open after 1 year, or you could go open after two. So obviously, fully open has the full 1% rate increase, but open after two, I think it's only about half a percentage higher on the rate.
Right.
So it's not a big deal. But if you're concerned, right, and you want to wait because rates are going to lower, you don't have to, right? Just do open after
Mhm.
two, right?
Mhm.
You'll get that appreciation, you'll get that cash flow for 2 years, and then we just change lenders, or even maybe even with the same lender, just
Mhm.
refinance
Hmm.
get that lower rate, and you're good to go.
Right.
So
And
that's
so
an
just to
option.
highlight for the listeners' benefit, rates are expected to bottom out in about 2, 3 years. So to be open after three means you can pay off that mortgage with another mortgage at the bottom rate,
Yeah,
which is strategically what everyone should do. Refinance when the rates have bottomed out,
that's
and
right.
and it costs you nothing in terms of versus I have a mortgage maturing at the end of this month for my investment property that I'm currently selling, so I have to renew my variable mortgage. And so when I do have to break that mortgage, that'll be 3 months interest. Thank God I don't have a huge mortgage. So that's 30. That'll be roughly $3,600. But you're saying I don't have to go through that. I won't have a break fee once the mortgage goes open.
That's right. And just to share this with you, Erwin, you want to price it out, but you should be able to renew into an open term. So there's no penalty. But the thing is, the bank or lender probably has two open terms. Usually it's a
Mhm.
6 month term or a year. And for some reason, the 6 month term is like 2% higher. I've seen them
Oh
come in at like
no.
9.99 for some reason. But it doesn't matter if you choose the year because it's still open. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
So I would inquire on that
That's
because no one's
crazy.
selling. Um, this podcast here could just save you 3 months worth of interest if you renew into an open mortgage.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, the open's 10%. But yeah.
But they have two. Ask them what their other open is if they're telling you 10%, because they have the year is usually cheaper. The year is usually about what variable rate is.
Hmm, hmm. Okay.
So
Because
check that out.
for the listeners' benefit, Scott got me this mortgage, so he knows exactly what I'm doing.
But it was at a lender that I no longer work
Yeah,
for, so I
yes.
don't have
But you are an
access.
insider.
Yeah, telling you the secrets. Yeah.
So how long roughly would it take to for someone to build significant credit to actually save on their mortgage interest rate?
Well, my favorite lender, they will, you have to have the mortgage for 1 year, and then you
That's
just
it.
have to have any credit, any other credit item. And you
That's
could have
it.
just opened it. There's no timeline. So even if it is a secured credit card, right, you open that, then you qualify to use your credit score for the pricing instead of default 680.
Mhm.
So yeah, after 1 year.
So Scott, fun news this fact of the day. I actually had lunch with a 20-year plus uh, executive vice president of CBRE yesterday, who's been in commercial real estate. Never invested in real estate though before, because he never found deals that made sense, especially with residential tenancy. Like it's not worth the risk. So I've been regularly talking to people who are in the industry to poke holes in my thesis that investing in, you know, boring landlord friendly southern states is a good investment. Can you like you've been around a long time? Can you do you got any holes to poke? And I welcome all listeners to reach out as well. Poke holes in my
Yeah.
strategy, please.
Here, here's I think the most important thing, and I think where investors can fail
Hmm.
is not having the right team. And you
Oh,
already
absolutely.
because you're investing long distance. And
Hmm.
if you don't have the right team, if
Hmm.
you're not regularly kept up to speed with what your property's doing, you're not looking at the sheets that come in from the property manager, right, and inspecting things, um, you could have a huge mess on your hands that you don't even know
Hmm.
it's there. So I think, locally here, people want to use the realtor that their friend recommends,
Hmm.
or my mom says they're great, so I'm going to use you. Um, and even though I think that's a huge mistake for investors, I feel like if you're an investor, you have to work with somebody that understands investors. You have to,
Hmm.
because otherwise the realtor will just sell you a property and say, oh, yeah, you can rent it out for X. Meanwhile, it's right next to the methadone clinic where you don't want to have tenants. Do you know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? Like,
Hmm.
where a good investor focused realtor will say, no, you don't want to buy there, you want to buy over here. So I think that's super, super important when you're building your team across the border.
Hmm.
Need to make the proper team, or I think you could fail. I don't want to say you will fail, right? Because the numbers and the landlord control, it's so much better. But I think you could fail if you set it up improperly.
Oh, absolutely. And just to add to that, I've said this on the show. I say this to my clients. The greatest risk to an Ontario landlord is actually the tenant, in my opinion. If they don't pay, if they cause damage to your property, your investment will be really challenged. It's going to strain. You're going to lose sleep. It's going to strain your relationships, right? But we don't have that same problem in the States. We've eliminated that problem. So then, several steps down, I believe, is property management is your greatest risk. Um, in my experience in Canada, is there's no really big property managers who have scale that will work with retail investors, right?
Mhm.
Versus I feel I've removed that risk by going through an asset manager like Share in the States. So I'll have a property manager. They're going to negotiate and manage that relationship with property managers who have thousands of houses across the country under management. So they have scale, they have systems, right?
Yep.
They have accountants, lawyers, tradespeople on staff, bringing down my costs. And that gives me the economies of scale.
Yeah.
Um, but I want to go back to team though, because something that's again something unique to Lend City is you're in Windsor, right? Your team is all Canadians, and aside from the Americans. But what is the benefit of being able to do all your financing under one roof? Like I'm a Canadian, like I'm gonna, and I'll have a question for you later on HELOC and stuff. But again, like, is it not advantageous to have both your Canadian mortgages and US mortgages under one roof?
Yeah, it is. And it's funny because I see I've been to different investing events, and there was some US lenders that came to this event, and it was in Canada. But this network is North American wide, so they do events in the States and here. And so the US lenders pitch was, we're boots on the ground, use us. But the funny thing is they're actually one of my lenders. I don't need to be boots on the ground to get the best rate. But the beauty for a Canadian is we can synchronize everything, and it truly is a one-stop shop. So in the States, um, if we know what's going on in Canada, a lot of the conditions that you'll need for that US mortgage, we can satisfy for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like
We've
proof of
seen your Canadian
funds.
file.
Yeah,
Yep, all
proof that
that.
you have
So,
6 to 12 months payments to cover the mortgage.
yep. The other thing too is we get paid by the lenders in Canada if you're refinancing your home and say buying over in the States. So another thing that we do is our investors that will work with us, we'll give them a break or a reduction on the fees. So generally speaking, the fees range from 0% on a mortgage in the States to 3%. Now, the 0% fee lenders, they're going to have a higher rate. So you're still paying for it, it's just built into your rate. The 2 to 3% lenders, you're getting the best rate, but there's fees. And I've run the math for a client, and it actually is cheaper to pay the fees because it's like a one-time cost, and then to get that lower rate forever than it is to accept the higher rate. Because then that you're paying that forever, right? Unless you
Mm-hmm.
change your mortgages. But anyways, we'll go to the lender and be like, look, we got paid on the Canadian side here. So we're okay. We'll take a reduction and pay on the US side over here. So it helps the Canadian to save money. Um, and then the other part of it is because we are in Canada and we're investing in the States, we know the troubles that a Canadian is going to go through getting started.
Yeah.
Where US lender, they could claim, hey, our headquarters is right here in Florida, and they may be able to provide the lending. They still haven't went through the journey. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So they're not going to be able to give that good advice or, hey, watch out for that over there where we've got that. So I think that's what's really important. Um, and it works both ways, actually. Now we're getting US lenders because they can't do it. They're actually referring us Canadians that want to refinance and then buy over there as well. So we're getting that now too. So with us, you don't need to do that. We have multiple lenders in the States. We have multiple lenders in Canada. We just
Mm-hmm.
optimize your flow and residential and commercial. And I got to be honest with you, I did not expect this. When we met and started talking about doing this, Erwin, I've actually done more commercial deals over there than I have residential deals.
Mm-hmm.
I was not expecting that, but there's lots of apartment buildings that we are working with lenders as we speak
Mm-hmm.
to finance. So it's
Mm-hmm.
it's really interesting. But I do think the single family southern states, different things like what Share's doing, I think that is
Mm-hmm.
very key. especially for the investor that's getting started, because it's the path of least resistance and it gets your feet wet. It allows you, like I just said, to go through that journey and
Mhm,
experience everything.
mhm,
And once you're more savvy and you want something bigger and better, then you go off, right? And you start doing your thing.
mhm. Yeah, I'm just cranky and old and boring, so I just can't keep it vanilla.
Whatever.
but
That's
but that's
okay.
actually great. Brings up a great point. What is the difference? What is the process? How is the process different for mortgage, getting a mortgage for an apartment building compared to a single family home?
Yeah. So over there, it's really hard to find the first lender. Now we've got them. But a lot of times in the past, a Canadian had to partner with a US citizen to be
Okay.
able to even buy an apartment building. And so actually a couple of our deals, we're refinancing them to get them out of that. But we've got the foreign buyer lenders that will move forward now. But pretty much it's just like if you're buying an apartment building through CMHC. So we go through Freddie. So we went through Freddie. It's called Freddie SBL for anybody who's looking at this, SBL small business loan. Um, and it's insured. So it's for apartment buildings. It's through the equivalent of CMHC, but in the States, there's Freddie and Fannie. Um, and they run the numbers, right? And they'll tell you based on the income the property is generating what you can qualify for as a lending in the purchase price. Uh, so you don't have as much control, right? Because you could buy an apartment building for 5 million, but if the rents only support 4, then that's all the financing you're getting based on. Do you know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Hmm.
So that's kind of the same over there too. It's still
Fantastic.
cash flow based.
All right, Scott, we're really running out of time. Thank you for being so generous with this, with your time. I saw your Christmas pictures. I had no idea how big your team was.
I mean, that's only part, right? We're missing Jillian in Toronto, and then we're working on Murray in Quebec. So
Oh, fantastic.
yeah.
Always growing. So, Scott, any final thoughts? I always like to give my guests a chance to share anything they want to talk about without me prompting them.
I mean, final thoughts. I just think it's people I find are scared of what they don't know. It
Uh-huh.
doesn't really matter what it is. If you don't know how to do something, you could be the guy that sits down at a table at a wedding and you don't dance because you don't know how to dance, right? So you're fearful of it, right? And that's just one silly example, but like it applies to investing, it applies to everything. And I think that if a Canadian will take a little bit of time and analyze investing in the States, I think they'll really like it.
Hmm.
I don't think like a Canadian should just say screw Canada and whatever. I mean, I think there's some benefits of diversifying, right? Having a little bit here, a little bit there, different property types too. So I still think Canada is great, but Canada has to get its act together. So I just encourage the investor to analyze the process. It's not that complicated. Um, you have people that can set this up for you from start to finish. I also have people that can do that. And it's all about building that teamwork and just doing something. And I think if an investor buys one property over there and does all that,
Hmm.
I think they're going to want to get a ton more properties over there because it's just night and day better for the landlord.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I've been playing with an example to just explain to investors how easy it is. For example, I was just running a simple example. If I bought 10 houses in the States, uh, in 10 years, I can cash flow over 110,000 US dollars per year,
Yeah.
right? That's a very simple model. It takes about 2 million Canadian equity to do so, right? So
Okay.
very slow, boring. It's only 10 properties. Any issues in really getting financing for 10 properties, Scott?
No.
Right? Because these are all
No.
cash flow, like from day one.
Yeah. The lenders, they'll do 15 each, but then they sell off the debt. That's very common in the States.
Right.
Sell off the debt to another mortgage company that wants to grow their books or whatever. And then you free up another 15. And the selling of the debt can take place within 5 minutes. They do it on sort of like a stock exchange. They have people that buy and sell debt all day long.
Mhm.
That's all they do.
Mhm.
So you just like 5 minutes later, you're good. You got 15 more.
Just 5 minutes. All right.
Yeah,
You're out of
that's it.
mortgages. Give us 5 minutes. All right.
Yeah,
You can have more 15 more now.
yeah,
So again, my point though is that it's very simple. Logistically operational is quite simple to own a 10 property portfolio. And again, my numbers show that you'll get to 10,000 cash, sorry, 110-ish that cash flow US dollars. And then, and then I say to everybody, find me this opportunity in Canada, right? Because these properties, because again, there's no rent control. So my properties will be like 8 caps in 10 years,
yeah.
right? Find me this opportunity in Canada, right? And again, list 17 listeners, like find me this opportunity. I'm happy to hear about it.
Yeah,
Um,
I
Scott,
love
before
it.
you go, actually, I had a question. Is there a right mix between using cash and HELOC and mortgage? Is there some sort of right mix?
Yeah. So we did
Oh,
talk
sorry,
about.
just preface that question because like you and I know some people that are literally going down with large HELOCs to just some people are doing 100% HELOC, which I don't agree with. I don't think you agree with either. Because at a minimum, you gotta be trying to build some credit, your credit in the States. But I'll let you talk to it. You're the expert.
Yeah, I mean, if you buy with all Canadian funds, you have the highest risk of currency risk, right? Look up currency risk. You're investing with Canadian dollars into a different market.
Hmm.
So in the stock market, you can hedge your investment, and that limits the currency risk, but you cannot do that in real estate. And I know I gave an example on your one seminar that you had. And the thing is if you invest now and our money hits par with the US, so it's the
Hmm.
same,
Hmm.
you actually end up overpaying for a property. If everything stays the same, then you're good. But every recession, the money goes really close to par. So that's when a lot of investors want to get out of the market if they're tight, right? When there's a recession and things get tough, they
Hmm.
want to sell because they financially need to.
Hmm.
So just if you invest with tons of Canadian dollars and then there's a challenge and you do have to sell a couple properties, let's say,
Hmm.
it's going to be the worst time to do it because of the rates. So I encourage investors just to only use their down payments from
Hmm.
Canada and
Hmm.
to try to use as much US dollars as possible. Now, over time, right? So when you start, that's what you're going to have to do. But over time, as you have a couple properties, then you can refinance them in the States. And then you're just using all US funds and buying over there with US funds. So then there's no currency risk, right? And then you reap the benefits where right now, where we've got the 30%, like the US dollars 30% more, then when you sell those properties or convert that cash flow or whatever it is,
Hmm.
convert that money to Canadian, then you get that 30% boost in profit, which is
Hmm.
super cool. So
Hmm.
I would try to invest with as much as possible. I know a lot of Canadians did want to use their lines of credit because it was cheaper, right? I mentioned 8 to 9.5% for lines of credit are prime plus half today, so 7.7. So they're thinking, okay, it's cheaper to use my line of credit. That's what I'm going to do.
Right.
Um, but knowing about the seller credit and that you can buy down to 6.5, it's actually cheaper to get the mortgage in the States than it is to use your line of credit.
Right.
So
Right.
there's variables, but I think the down payment is totally fine to leverage in Canada while you get started. And then after you build up a portfolio, you won't need to do that, right? You tap into your equity there and just keep growing. So that's what I would suggest.
Yeah. Get to that 10, 20 portfolio number, property portfolio number, get that 100 grand cash flow a year. Because I think that's something that everyone should be going for because I think everyone can appreciate what $100,000 US in cash flow would mean to their lives. Right.
It's huge. And even if you shift, Irwin, say you get your 10, and you're like, you know what? I'm done. And then your strategy shifts and you just pay off that debt. Then you've got 110K US dollar a year salary.
Hmm. Hmm. And it goes up each year because there's no rent control.
Yeah.
Like you might double in like 5 years. Now you're talking 200 grand.
And you can.
Right.
I've spoken to a lot of people that do JVs over there,
Yeah. Yeah.
and this is past JVs, but they've been able to repay their investor
Hmm.
um, everything like within 5 years.
Hmm.
from the success stories I've heard. Obviously, there's probably a ton of failures I haven't
Oh,
heard,
there's tons of failures out there.
but still, like that's incredible. So you partner with somebody, you can get your money back in 5 years just based on the appreciation and how their market is. It's
Hmm.
crazy.
Yes, yes. Lots of people lose money, which is why I'm going down with the best possible team I can possibly find.
Yeah, makes sense.
Scott, where can people reach you? Want me to give out your
Um,
cell phone number?
sure, I don't mind.
Your
But
Snapchat?
full
Your
disclosure though,
TikTok?
I'm going to give my cell phone.
No,
But I made a promise to my team that I'm the consultant for the US lending, but they're all processing them. So if
Mhm,
anybody
mhm.
calls, I'm just here to hold your hand, but I will partner you with somebody on my team to actually process them. So yeah, I'll share it. It's 226-348-7884.
Fabulous. Website?
Yeah, that's lendcity.ca. And actually, if you go there, right when you like we designed the page so you can book a strategy call. It's like right on the top of every page. So you can book a call with someone on my team, myself. If you've got commercial mortgages, like there's a commercial section on there. It's nice and easy to book a call.
Fabulous. And again, you can service people both for Canadian mortgages and US mortgages.
Absolutely. Residential and commercial, doesn't matter.
Fabulous. Scott, thanks so much for doing this. Thanks for bringing this to our community and at our peak pain time as Ontario landlords. BC landlords are feeling it too. Alberta, you guys are good.
For now. But awesome. Yeah, you're welcome. It was a
They're
lot of
basically
fun.
the envy of all of us.
It's crazy. I hope they get to stay how they are. I hope things don't change, but you
Yeah.
never.
They should threaten to separate from Canada if things change.
That's right. That's right.
We'll miss them though.
Yeah.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you as well. Take care, Erwin.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to invest in real estate from scratch, my team teaches beginners how to use the #1 investment strategy that I personally use in a virtual free training class every month. Go to investortraining.ca/YouTube to register for our next class. The link is also in the description as well. I publish at least 2 to 3 videos a week here, so subscribe if you want to keep learning from seasoned investors like myself and my guests. And if you're just starting out, feel free to ask questions and comment below, and I do the best to answer each of those comments and questions myself. Again, if you're ready to learn the nitty-gritty about real estate investing from a professional investor, register for our next virtual class. That's at investortraining.ca/YouTube. Thanks again for watching. See you in the next video.